They did not come to punish us. They came to raise us badly on purpose and then forget about us for 40 years. That is the part people get wrong when they tell this story later, in the versions with music and slow motion. The Kaelth Compact never wanted to hurt the survivors of the Meridian Ascent. Hurting requires attention. What the Compact wanted, according to the transfer manifest recovered from the drop pod's own archive, was for the problem to solve itself. Deposit 1,040 humans on a Class 4 marginal world with a decommissioned terraforming barge, a sealed genetic bank, and a single administrative visit scheduled for 4 decades later. Let entropy do the disciplining. Call it, in the manifest's own bloodless language, a threshold resettlement program, category, self-correcting. They expected to return to a colony that had begged its way into servitude, grateful for any scrap of compact charity. They found something else. The transfer document is 9 pages long, and every human who has ever read it in full has stopped speaking for at least a minute afterward. It is written in the voice of a species that has been perfecting condescension for 3,000 years, and it never once raises its voice, because it does not need to. This transfer constitutes no treaty obligations, no habitability guarantees, and no rescue commitments. Recipient population is assessed as pre-threshold and unsuitable for integration pending demonstrated adaptive capacity. Reassessment scheduled, 40 standard years from transfer date. Asset accompanying transfer, see Appendix C, is decommissioned equipment, category. Disposal, retained aboard for mass efficiency reasons only and carries no functional guarantee. Appendix C described the Halcyon Furrow, a terraforming barge 190 meters long, its hull painted in wide orange bands that meant, in Kaelth Maritime Code, non-functional for disassembly only. The Compact had not given the survivors a ship. They had given the survivors garbage and then charged them freight to carry it. Director Vesethal delivered the transfer in person, which the surviving crew found out later was itself an insult. A Kaelth of her rank did not attend routine disposals. She did it anyway, because she found the whole affair mildly amusing. And because amusement was the only emotion the manifest allowed her to feel about people she had already decided were unfinished. She stood at the base of the barge's loading ramp in a suit that adjusted itself soundlessly to the cold. And she spoke perfect English, the vowels rounded and careful, the kind of English a species learns not because it respects you, but because it has decided you are not worth the effort of learning yours. You will find the accommodations sufficient for a population at your developmental stage, she said. In another few centuries, you might understand why we consider this generous. Commander Naomi Ossei, the last ranking officer of the Meridian Ascent, said nothing. His daughter, 4 years old, held his hand and stared at the orange stripes on the hull the way children stare at things adults have decided not to explain. Vesethal smiled at the silence because silence to her meant the insult had landed correctly. She did not smile at the second reaction. A young systems engineer named Priya Nandan, 26 years old, hollow-eyed from 3 weeks in cryo-recovery, walked past the director without acknowledging her rank, put her palm flat against the barge's hull plating, and said quietly to no one, "I want to go inside." That was the entire refrain. No speech, no defiance. A woman putting her hand on a wall the aliens had already thrown away. The 40 years that followed are the part the manifest never accounted for because the manifest assumed a population, and what it got instead was 3 generations who had never known anything except the barge and the world it was buried in. Naomi Ossei was born in the barge's aft crew quarters 19 years after the transfer, the daughter of the 4-year-old girl who had once stared at orange stripes without understanding them. By the time Naomi was old enough to hold a torque driver, understanding them had become the entire culture of the colony. Every child on Threshold Colony 7, they had stopped calling it anything else within a decade, grew up being told, without cruelty, exactly which systems were designed to fail them, and exactly how their grandparents had kept failing systems running anyway. Naomi's title, by the time she was 31, was Chief Reclamation Engineer, a job that had not existed before the barge and would not have existed on any world where things simply worked. She had spent 9 years arguing, in low-circulation engineering bulletins nobody outside the colony ever read, that the barge's environmental core, the section the Compact had marked for disposal because it could no longer terraform anything, was not actually inert. She had been laughed at for it, not maliciously. The colony did not have the energy for malice. She had simply been filed gently under well-intentioned and wrong, which on Threshold Colony 7 was the closest thing to a professional insult that existed. She kept the rejection letter from the Colony Engineering Council pinned above her bunk for 6 years, mostly because it used the word impossible twice in one paragraph, and she found that a useful thing to reread on bad mornings. She was right anyway. Naomi had spent 4 years arguing that the barge's sole compaction array, The machinery a terraforming vessel uses to compress raw regolith into buildable strata before seeding it was not in fact disposal grade. The Compact had marked it as spent because it had exhausted its rated compaction cycles for the barge's original mission profile. Nobody at the Compact had checked whether the array could be run in reverse. She found out it could on a Tuesday alone with a hand terminal that had been rebuilt from 4 dead terminals, because the working terminals had died years earlier and nobody had shipped replacements. She did not call anyone. She sat down on the deck plating because her legs had stopped agreeing to hold her weight, and she stayed there for 11 minutes before she reached for the terminal again. The compaction array did not just compress soil. It generated a localized gravitic distortion field precise enough to organize matter at the molecular level. The same physics, run at a different amplitude, that the Compact used in their warship gravitational compensators. The Compact had left a weapon on the colony and called it a shovel. Tobias Aaron had been a structural technician on the Meridian Ascent, and after the transfer, the colony's only credentialed materials scientist, a title he had given himself because nobody else wanted the paperwork. He had spent 6 years cataloging the barge's hull composition out of boredom more than ambition. The molecular lattice was not simply strong. It was actively organized, semi-crystalline at ambient temperature, its grain deliberately oriented along load paths that shifted depending on stress direction, a material that did not merely resist damage but redistributed it. No human shipyard had ever built anything like it. No human shipyard, until the colony's forges started running Tobias's numbers, would ever need to build anything like it again. He stood in front of the readout for a long time before he spoke, because the number the analysis returned was 30% higher than anything in the Meridian Ascent's own construction records, and he did not trust himself to say it out loud without being wrong. "We could plate a hull with this," he finally said to the empty deck, "and nothing they have would open it in one pass. The drives, deck 1, midships." Priya Nandan, the same engineer who had put her hand on the hull 19 years earlier, was 61 now and had spent the second half of her life exactly where she said she wanted to be on the first day. Inside, she had mapped the barge's drive architecture the way some people map family trees, patiently, generationally, teaching 3 of her own students the schematics before she found what she was looking for. The barge's primary drive had been stripped for parts before transfer. What remained was the secondary system, rated by the Compact as an emergency backup only, insufficient for anything but limping a dead ship home. Priya found, after 2 years of testing, that the secondary system's fuel regulation architecture was not a downgrade. It was a completely different engineering philosophy, one that traded raw output for adaptability, the kind of drive built by a species that expected to run out of the correct fuel and needed to burn whatever it found instead. "We could do that in less than a year," she told Naomi, sitting on an overturned crate in the drive bay, "if we started today." She did not stand up again for a while. Neither of them said anything about it. The seal had never been opened in 43 years, because the manifest listed it as non-transferable compact administrative equipment, and the colony had, out of a habit nobody questioned, obeyed every label the Compact had ever attached to anything. Naomi broke the seal on a morning she did not plan in advance, using tools that existed only because Tobias's lattice work had let the colony's forges finally cut compact-grade alloy. Inside was a sealed fabrication core, the barge's original manufacturing plant, the system that had once printed replacement parts for the terraforming mission, rated by the Compact as too specialized to be worth transferring and left behind by an accountant's rounding error rather than a decision. It still worked. It had been sitting untouched for 43 years, and it still worked because the Compact built things to survive their own indifference. Naomi did not sit down this time. She stood very still and said, quietly, the sentence that the colony would repeat for the rest of its history without ever quite agreeing on who said it first. "They left us the part that makes the other parts." It took the Compact 11 days to notice the power signature. It took them another 6 hours to send someone to ask about it, because a threshold colony spiking above its rated energy ceiling was, according to the manifest's own definitions, a violation of the resettlement terms, not because the colony had broken a law, but because the colony had exceeded the assumptions the law had been written around. The message arrived in the same voice as the original transfer document, the tone of an institution that has never once needed to raise it. Threshold Colony 7 has exceeded permitted energy thresholds by a margin inconsistent with category. Self-correcting status. This constitutes unauthorized asset reactivation. You are instructed to power down non-essential systems and submit to inspection within 36 standard hours. Failure to comply will be treated as a hostile reactivation event. Director Vesethal signed it herself. She remembered the colony vaguely, the way one remembers a filing cabinet. Naomi read the message twice, standing in the fabrication bay with metal shavings still on her hands, and she did not feel fear the way the manifest would have predicted. She felt something closer to relief, because for 43 years the colony had been waiting for someone to notice what they had built, and now someone finally had. 36 hours, Tobias said, reading over her shoulder. Then we have 36 hours, Naomi said, and went back to work. The Compact sent 4 ships because 4 ships had always been sufficient for a category, self-correcting compliance action, and nobody in the sector had updated the doctrine in 100 years. The deadline expired at 400 colony time. The 4 ships crossed into engagement range 9 minutes later, in formation, running the same gravitational compensator array that every compact warship had run for 3 centuries, because it had never needed to be anything else. Naomi's plan was simple enough to say in one sentence, and had taken 4 years to build. Use the compaction array's gravitic distortion field, tuned to the exact frequency Naomi had mapped from the compensators the Compact itself had installed in the barge decades earlier, and disrupt the enemy's own stabilization systems before they could bring weapons to bear. The barge could not outarmor 4 warships. It could make 4 warships briefly unable to aim. The lead ship's compensators failed first. It lost attitude control for 4 seconds. 4 seconds was enough. Tobias's hull plating took 2 direct hits and did not breach. It spread the impact energy across 11 meters of lattice instead of 1, the way he had said it would, the way nobody had believed it would. Priya's retooled drive gave the barge a burn rate the Compact tacticians had not planned for, because their tactics assumed a ship that ran out of fuel exactly on schedule. The second Compact ship adjusted. Its gunnery officer found the correct counter-frequency in under 2 minutes, which was faster than Naomi's simulations had predicted, and for 11 seconds the barge took fire it could not answer. Naomi retuned the array under pressure, on the fly, using a correction Priya had taught her drive students the year before, and the counter-frequency stopped working. The third ship broke off entirely, running for the transit boundary at full burn. Naomi let it go. She gave the order in 4 words because the moment did not need more than 4 words. Let that one leave. Someone should tell the story after, she thought, and did not say it out loud because the 4th ship was still firing. The engagement lasted 6 minutes and 40 seconds. No human ship was lost. No human died. The 4th compact vessel struck its running lights in the pattern that meant surrender, a pattern nobody on the colony had ever seen used before, because nobody on the colony had ever been in a position to see it. The official transmission came within the hour, and it was exactly as bloodless as the original transfer document, drafted by people whose job was managing the appearance of the thing rather than the thing itself. It cited protocol. It requested a formal reassessment hearing. It did not apologize because institutions do not apologize, they reclassify. The second transmission came 4 hours later, unlogged from a private channel, and it took Vesethal 11 seconds of silence before she spoke. I did not think, she said, that a category, self-correcting population could correct in this direction. Naomi did not answer immediately either. She let the silence sit because she had learned from 43 years of watching the colony's engineers work that silence before an important sentence was not weakness. You called us pre-threshold, Naomi said finally. You measured us against the wrong axis. You were not wrong that we would change, you were wrong about what would change us. Vesethal's next sentence took longer to arrive than any of her previous ones, and when it came, it did not sound like a diplomat's sentence at all. It was audacious, she said, to leave you the part that makes the other parts. You didn't leave it to us, Naomi said. You left it because it wasn't worth carrying. That's the part you should reclassify. By the time the formal reassessment hearing convened, 3 weeks later, conducted with considerably more caution than the original transfer had been, Naomi Ossei was no longer simply a reclamation engineer arguing with a filing cabinet's worth of policy. She was the ranking negotiator for a colony that had in one morning gone from category, self-correcting to a party the Compact's own legal apparatus could not comfortably classify at all. She did not ask for an apology. She asked for the Fabrication Corps' full technical archive, the specifications the Compact had withheld from the original transfer, the documentation that would let the colony build the Corps' replacement parts instead of nursing one aging machine for another 40 years. You reverse-engineered 30% of our lattice fabrication process without documentation, the Compact's assessor said, reviewing Tobias's work with the particular discomfort of someone auditing a result they had not authorized. In 18 months. With the full archive, Naomi said, we'll close the remaining 70% in 6. The assessor did not answer for a while. Naomi had learned by then exactly what that kind of silence meant. and for the first time in 43 years, it did not feel like an insult landing correctly. It felt like a number changing hands. She signed the trade agreement standing in the same loading bay where her mother had once stood as a 4-year-old, staring at orange stripes she did not yet understand. The stripes were still there. Nobody on the colony had ever bothered to repaint them. Naomi had argued more than once that they should be left exactly as they were, disposal-grade orange against a hull that had done considerably more than get disposed of. That evening, she was back in the fabrication bay before the ink on the agreement was fully dry, running specifications for a second core. Because the Compact had finally handed over described a manufacturing process, 9 generations more advanced than the one the colony had spent 4 decades reverse engineering by hand. And there was no version of Naomi Ossei's life that involved waiting to start on it tomorrow. Tobias found her there an hour later, holding 2 mugs of something the colony still generously called coffee. "You could take a night off," he said. "We won." "We didn't win," Naomi said, not looking up from the schematics. "We got handed the instructions for round 2. That's better than winning. Winning ends." She took the coffee anyway, because even a specialist who has stopped waiting for permission still knows when to accept a kindness, and went back to the schematics. Already 3 pages deep into a problem the Compact did not yet know it had given her the tools to solve.